Hey guys, welcome back. TJ here with DeadHistory, and welcome back to part 2 of our next installment of our Declaration of Independence signer series, as we're taking a look at ThomasStone of Maryland. That's right, ThomasStone. Yesterday, part 1, we took a look at the early life, education, his upbringing and all that sort of thing. And now in this part 2, we're going to take a look, of course, at, his time in politics and the Continental Congress, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, of course, and then his life afterward. And to be honest with you, his kind of short life afterward. He died a pretty young man. So we're going to get into all that, and you're going to learn all about it. So, I hope you enjoyed part 1. Part 2 today, we definitely will have some bonus footage at the end of part 2 today. So definitely stay tuned for that as well. So here we go. Without any further ado, let's get right into it. Part 2, ThomasStone, Declaration of Independence signer from Maryland. Here we go. After the outbreak of hostilities at Lexington and Concord, ThomasStone was chosen as a member of the Second Continental Congress from Maryland. And on July 8th of 1775, he signed the Olive Branch Petition of the Congress in an effort at reconciliation. Stone's views are well expressed in this letter. I wish to conduct affairs so that a just and honorable reconciliation should take place, or that we should be unanimous in a resolution to fight it out for independence. The proper way to effect this is not to move too quick, but then we must take care to do everything which is necessary for our security and defense, not suffer ourselves to be lulled or wheedled by any deceptions, declarations, or givings out. You know my heart wishes for peace upon terms of security and justice to America. But war, anything, is preferable to a surrender of our rights. At this time, ThomasStone and the other Maryland delegates in Philadelphia were operating under uncompromising strictures placed on them by the Convention of Maryland. This body governed the colony after Royal Governor Robert Eden had been forced out of power. The convention, sitting safely in quiet, provincial Annapolis, was afraid their delegates in Philadelphia might not reflect the conservative royalist stance of most members of the assembly. The delegates in Congress were urged to arrive at a happy settlement and lasting amity with Great Britain, and were instructed to not, without the previous knowledge and approbation of the convention of the province, assent to any proposition to declare these colonies independent of the Crown of Great Britain. So even though surrounded by mounting agitation for independence in Philadelphia, the Maryland delegates were bound to act with caution. By early 1776, there was a growing sentiment in Congress and the country for independence. In a letter to his friend James Holliday, ThomasStone anticipated the rupture with Great Britain and his apprehension over the situation. The die is cast. The fatal stab is given to any future connection between this country and Britain, except in the relation of conqueror and vanquished, which I can't think of without horror and indignation. After Richard Henry Lee's resolution for independence and union on June 7th, a drafting committee of 13 members was formed, consisting of one delegate from each colony, to prepare a constitution that would become known as the Articles of Confederation. ThomasStone was chosen to represent Maryland in the drafting of the document. No peace commissioners had arrived from England by July 2nd, and Congress prepared to vote for independence. A few days prior to the vote, the Maryland Convention had given her delegates permission to vote as they thought best, and ThomasStone joined his fellow Marylanders and voted for independence. At the age of 33, he was the youngest member of the Maryland delegation to vote for the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, and he signed the Declaration on August 2nd, 1776. On July 12th, ThomasStone wrote as follows to the Maryland Council of Safety: "May God send victory to the arm lifted in support of righteousness, virtue, and freedom, and crush even to destruction the power which wantonly would trample on the rights of mankind." ThomasStone dreaded the prospect of a long, bloody war with the mother country, however, and hoped for reconciliation as late as September. At that time, 3 American commissioners, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Edward Rutledge, met with Admiral Lord Howe on Staten Island in a final unsuccessful attempt at reconciliation. ThomasStone was elected a Maryland state senator in September of 1776 and served in that capacity for several years. He acted as the Senate's commissioner in negotiations with Virginia concerning jurisdiction over Chesapeake Bay. In 1783, Stone was again elected to the Continental Congress. He took his seat on March 26th of 1784 and served as its chairman near the end of the session. In 1785, he resumed his lucrative law practice, now in Annapolis, where he practiced with distinction. As an advocate, he excelled in strength of argument. He was often employed in cases of great difficulty, and by his brethren of the bar, it was thought eminently desirable at such times to have him for their colleague. His last act of public service occurred the following year when he played a major part in marking out the progress from the Mount Vernon Convention of 1785 to the deliberations of the Constitutional Convention. In 1787, Stone's wife Margaret became alarmingly ill. She'd received a smallpox inoculation a decade earlier, and from the effects of the mercury contained in the vaccine, she experienced a long state of weakness and decline. During her illness, Stone wrote as follows: "The illness of a wife I esteem most dearly, preys most severely on my spirits. She is, as I thank God, something better this afternoon, and this intermission of her disorder affords me time to write to you. The doctor thinks she is in a fair way of being well in a few days. I wish I thought so." ThomasStone watched over her with unwearied devotion, and a deep and abiding melancholy overtook his spirit. At length, however, in the middle of 1787, she sank to the grave at the early age of only 36. From this time on, the health of Stone evidently declined. The grief-stricken Stone abandoned his work and declined to attend the Constitutional Convention to which he had been elected. In the autumn, his physicians advised him to take a sea voyage, and in obedience to that advice, he traveled to Alexandria to embark for England. Before the vessel was ready to sail, however, he suddenly expired on October 5th of 1787 in the 45th year of his age. ThomasStone is buried in the family graveyard about 200 yards from his home at HabreDeVenture in Port Tobacco, Maryland. ThomasStone was a tall, thin, pale lawyer, a gentleman of acknowledged talents and of inflexible and incorruptible integrity. He was a professor of religion and distinguished for a sincere and fervent piety. To strangers, he had the appearance of austerity, but among his intimate friends, he was affable, cheerful, and familiar. In his disposition, he was uncommonly amiable and well-disposed. His life reflects a nature, background, ability, and spirit for freedom unmatched by most colonials during the decade before the Declaration. Rugged, reticent, and reserved, Stone is one of the least conspicuous of Maryland's great revolutionary heroes, not because he was not entitled to the plaudits of the enthusiasts of the Republic then in the making, but because he shunned notoriety, and it was only given to a few intimate associates to know the true worth of the man. He was highly regarded by his peers. He was described as a courageous, deliberate, and sensitive patriot who, though always physically delicate, possessed an inside toughness of soul and spirit that was never flaunted. Always intuitive, humble, diplomatic, and insightful in treatment of his peers, he could be rigid and quite self-defensive when conditions so demanded. A fellow member in the Maryland State Senate expressed this accolade: a talented writer. He was most truly a perfect man of business. He would often take the pen and commit to paper all the necessary writings of the Senate, and this he would do cheerfully while the other members were amusing themselves with desultory conversation. He appeared to be naturally of an irritable temper. Still, he was mild and courteous in his general deportment, fond of society and conversation, and universally a favorite from his great good humor and intelligence. He thought and wrote much as a professional man and as a statesman. On the business before him in those characters, he had no leisure for other subjects. Not that he was unequal to the task, for there were few men who could commit their thought to paper with more facility or greater strength of argument. There was a severe trial of skill between the Senate and the House of Delegates on the subject of confiscating British property. The Senate, for several sessions, unanimously rejected bills passed by the House of Delegates for that purpose. Many, very long and tart, were the messages from one to the other body on this subject, the whole of which were on the part of the Senate, the work of Mr. Stone and his close friend and equal in all respects, the venerable Charles Carroll of Carrollton. HabreDeVenture, the house of Thomas Stone, is known as the Thomas Stone National Historic Site. It is located about 30 miles south of Washington, D.C., and about 4 miles west of La Plata, on 6655 Rose Hill Road between Maryland Route 6 and 225 near Port Tobacco, Maryland. The home remained in private hands until 1977, when a fire swept through the main block of the house. The property was declared a National Historic Site in 1978 and was purchased by the National Park Service in 1981. After restoration, the home was opened to the public in 1997. The main block of the house is Georgian in architecture and houses Stone's original law desk and cabinets holding some of Stone's possessions. At the time of his death, the estate comprised 1,300 acres and currently consists of 322 acres with paths, open fields, a tobacco barn, 2 corn cribs, stables, a pond, and the Stone family cemetery. A memorial plaque was installed on the home's memorial ledger on July 4th of 1978 by the Maryland Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. On April 28th of 2013, ThomasStone was honored at his gravesite by a plaque installed by the DSDI. Two of ThomasStone's brothers played an important role in his life and the founding of the Republic. ThomasStone left his estate to his younger brother, Michael Jennifer Stone, who lived at the estate and managed it when Thomas was absent. Michael served in the Maryland House of Delegates from 1781 to 1783 and was a delegate to the Maryland Ratifying Convention for the new U.S. Constitution in 1789. He served in the First Congress from 1789 to 1791. Another of ThomasStone's brothers, John Hoskins Stone, served in the military in the Revolutionary War and later enjoyed a prominent political career. He joined Colonel Smallwood's battalion in the Continental Army in 1775 and rose through the ranks to become colonel and commander of the 1st Maryland Regiment. He fought at the battles of Brooklyn, White Plains, and Princeton in 1776, and in the battles of Brandywine and Germantown in 1777. John was wounded at Germantown and as a result was lame for the rest of his life. He was back in active command in the Battle of Monmouth, but his military career ended in 1779 when he was wounded again more seriously during the storming of Stony Point on the Hudson River. He resigned his commission soon after the battle. Returning to Maryland, he served on the state's Executive Council from 1779 to 1785 and again for several years until 1792. John was elected governor of Maryland for a 3-year term and served from 1794 to 1797. And of course, the large mural painting by Barry Faulkner showing several of the signers of the Declaration, including ThomasStone, who is shown standing in the second row. Another source here, Stone remained in Congress, this is after the Declaration, but he maintained a low profile. He was appointed to the committee charged with drawing up an oath for the officers, and he was on the committee that was responsible for creating the Articles of Confederation adopted during 1777. Nevertheless, Stone did not sign the Articles. That year, Stone was re-elected to Congress, but he retired during 1778 and returned to Maryland. In Maryland, as a member of the state Senate since 1776, Stone worked at the legislature adopt the Articles of Confederation, but there too, he was not a vocal legislator. Maryland did not do so until 1781. Despite having retired from public life, Stone appears to have been re-elected during 1783 and was present when General George Washington appeared at Congress to offer his resignation. During 1784, ThomasStone served again in Congress and for several days presided as president. And then it goes on to say that he retired at the end of that session and he returned to public life only once again when he and 2 others were appointed as Maryland delegates at the Mount Vernon Conference held during 1785 between representatives of Virginia and Maryland to find solutions to problems regarding navigation of the Potomac River. That conference was hosted by George Washington. We know, of course, following year, 1787, Stone's wife died. And then in 1787, a little later on, he died. ThomasStone interred at the family cemetery near HabreDeVenture. ThomasStone's 3 children survived him, but his son Frederick, who was not married, was struck down by the yellow fever epidemic of 1793 while he was in Philadelphia studying to be a lawyer. His daughter Mildred had married Travers Daniels, and daughter Margaret Eleanor married John Moncure Daniel of the Crow's Nest, Stafford County, Virginia. ThomasStone passed quietly through the turbulent early years of this country's life, making only ripples in the political waters of his time. Although by 1776, he had a dozen years of law practice and public life behind him, years marked by fierce controversy between Maryland's patriots and Tories, there was little independence fever in him. In fact, he actually favored the 1774 poll tax to support the Anglican clergy, a measure bitterly opposed by the other Maryland signers, and advocated treating for peace with Lord Howe in September 1776, a move viewed as subversive by many supporters of independence. Perhaps it was simply the man's temperament that made him shy away from violent controversy. Certain qualities make good rebels but poor nation builders, while other traits make reluctant revolutionaries but constructive statesmen. Very likely, it was the possession of these latter capacities that won Stone a place on the joint Maryland-Virginia Commission studying jurisdiction over Chesapeake Bay. A visit to Port Tobacco, once the area of ThomasStone's residence, gives a clue, but only a clue, to his quiet strength. The silent countryside may well have helped to make him the kind of man he was, although Stone had also lived in busy Annapolis before even building his residence, HabreDeVenture. We now possess only sparse knowledge of the events of Stone's life, yet one personal detail comes through with great clarity. The signer was exceptionally devoted to his wife. In 1787, Maryland named Stone to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. The choice was natural, for Stone had been a member of the committee that framed the early Articles of Confederation. But the appointment came at a poor time. Stone's wife lay seriously ill from an unsuccessful attempt to immunize her against smallpox. He declined the appointment in order to stay with her. When Mrs. Stone died, neither Maryland nor America held any further appeal for him, and he resolved to go to England. While waiting at Alexandria, Virginia, for his ship to sail, Stone himself died just a few months after his wife. His quiet career was over at 44, and he was laid to rest in the peaceful earth of rural Maryland. ThomasStone served in the Continental Congress until October of 1778, except for part of 1777. His most notable work was on the committee which framed the Articles of Confederation. A few days prior to the July 2nd, 1776 vote, Maryland gave her delegates permission to vote as they thought best, and ThomasStone voted in favor of independence. He signed the Declaration of Independence on August 2nd of 1776. In September of 1776, Stone was elected a Maryland state senator. He acted as their commissioner, conferring with Virginia concerning jurisdiction of the Chesapeake Bay. In 1777, he participated in the drafting of the Articles of Confederation, and in 1783 was elected to the Confederation Congress. He took his seat on March 26th of 1784 and served its chairman near the end of the session. ThomasStone again took up the practice of law in 1785. He was elected as a delegate to the Federal Constitutional Convention on May 25th of 1787. However, in August, he declined to attend. ThomasStone is the least known of the Maryland signers because he seldom spoke while in Congress or in the Maryland Senate. He was not prominent in debates, but served on important committees, including the one for framing the Articles of Confederation. ThomasStone supported the same somewhat head-in-the-sand approach to dealing with England shared by many of his fellow Marylanders. He was quiet in Congress, but when the time came to vote on Lee's resolution, he went along with everyone else. Other noted conservative signers, Braxton and Rutledge, for example, did the same. Only George Reed of Delaware actively voted against independence on July 2nd and then went on to sign in August. Perhaps Stone's most significant contribution was his role on the committee that drafted the Articles of Confederation, which were not approved till November of 1777. He remained in Congress until 1778, and he continued his duties as a member of the state Senate. In 1783, he was again elected to the Continental Congress, and the following year was even acting president for a short time. Not bad for someone who barely said boo and kept hoping that the colonies in Great Britain would kiss and make up. After representing Maryland at the Mount Vernon Conference in 1785, Stone was elected to attend the Constitutional Convention in 1787, an event that coincided with one of the greatest tragedies of his life. Unfortunately, his beloved wife was yet another victim of a smallpox inoculation gone bad. During Revolutionary times, this inoculation involved plucking pus from an existing smallpox victim and transferring the goop to an incision under the skin of an individual who had not yet been exposed to the deadly disease. The newly infected person typically came down with a mild case of smallpox and was kept in quarantine until he or she recovered, immune from then on. The treatment worked, but it wasn't exactly foolproof. There was always the chance you might die, go blind, or pass it on. Stone's wife became ill after her inoculation in 1777 and lived in worsening health for a decade, never recovering. The Constitutional Convention began in May of 1787, and Stone's wife died in June. He never recovered from her death. Grief-stricken and depressed, Stone gave up his law practice and planned a trip to England. While waiting for his ship in Alexandria, Virginia, he suddenly collapsed and died, just 4 months after losing his wife. He was only about 44 years old. A major reason that ThomasStone resisted attempts to send him back to the Continental Congress was to remain close to his wife, Margaret, and care for her. Except for one brief trip to Philadelphia, where he spent time as president of the Confederation, ThomasStone would stay with Margaret in Maryland. ThomasStone would serve out the remainder of the 1776 congressional session, but in 1777 he declined reappointment and instead accepted an appointment to serve in the Maryland Senate in Annapolis. He would stay there for the remainder of his life. Part of the reason for the change was the health of his wife, Margaret. Margaret was bedridden for many of the last years of her life, and Stone wanted to be closer to her. His family moved out of their HabreDeVenture property in 1783 and went to Annapolis, buying the house known as the Peggy Stewart House. Now, referring to Stone's, the HabreDeVenture, the ThomasStone National Historic Site, much of Stone's furniture and personal belongings were donated to the historic site for display by the family. It's because of the family that the site has as many of Stone's belongings as they do. But one important facet of this site is that the family was adamant that we tell the whole story. They told us to put things in historical perspective, right or wrong. The Stones owned slaves and were in fact slave traders. Thomas Stone's uncle, Daniel of St. Thomas Jennifer, his real name, he owned the boat that brought Kunta Kinte to the colonies. Stone took his time in forming opinions with no preconceived notions. He argued, then brought out his opinion strongly and clearly. The quiet patriot, after his wife died, this quiet patriot stopped eating or drinking anything. His cheekbones became hollow. Some say that Thomas Stone died of a broken heart. You know, you've probably never even heard of Thomas Stone before this video. He wasn't a big, famous personality like Benjamin Franklin. He did not do anything flashy like Caesar Rodney did when he made a midnight ride from Delaware to Philadelphia, making it just in time to vote in favor of the Declaration. Thomas Stone did not go on to become president like John Adams or vice president like Elbridge Gerry. Instead, Thomas Stone was simply a patriot who worked hard, served his country, and put his life on the line by signing the Declaration of Independence, a document that King George III viewed as treason. How wonderful to live in a country where such a statement can be made. He simply put his life on the line. Nothing too flashy. Unfortunately, Stone's wife became sickly at about the time that the Declaration was approved. Margaret Stone had decided to get inoculated against smallpox, but the process did not go well. She was never the same again. For 11 years, she struggled with ill health before finally passing away in 1787. The grief-stricken Thomas Stone died just 4 months later. Shortly before his death, he wrote a letter. "I am now in a weak state," he told his 12-year-old son, "about to travel and probably shall not see you more." He was saying goodbye. What would he wish his son to know? What principles would enable his son to live a good and successful life? "Shun all giddy, loose and wicked company," Stone told his son. "They will corrupt and lead you into vice and bring you to ruin. Seek the company of sober, virtuous, and good people who will always shew you examples of rectitude, of conduct and propriety, of behavior which will lead to solid happiness. Take care not to be seduced by the professions of any person to do what your heart tells you is wrong." It's good advice that still rings true today. Thomas Stone, Maryland signer of the Declaration of Independence. Kind of an interesting guy, you know, somebody who really most people don't know about. And sadly, most people probably will never really know about. Really beautiful plantation and home that he has, HabreDeVenture. You're going to see that in the bonus footage. Now, I've never been inside the actual house because first time I was there in 2020, it was closed, of course, for COVID. And when Henry and I were just there recently, we went kind of after hours when it was just closing. So we didn't get to go inside, but you'll see photos and such. It's quite interesting. Some legacy and honors. The World War II Liberty ship SSS Thomas Stone was named in his honor, or SS Thomas Stone, I should say. Thomas Stone High School in Charles County, Maryland is named after him. Some interesting stuff. And I leave you guys with this. You know my heart wishes for peace upon terms of security and justice to America. But war, anything, is preferable to a surrender of our rights. Thomas Stone, April 24th of 1776. The signer who died of a broken heart. Well, there you have it, guys. Part 2, the life, the legacy and the death of Thomas Stone, Maryland signer of the Declaration of Independence. Stay tuned for some bonus footage. You get to see the gravesite and just the surrounding land of the HabreDeVenture plantation and Thomas Stone National Historic Site there in Charles County or Port Tobacco, Maryland. So stay tuned for that. And again, thank you so much, guys, for all the support, the likes, comments, questions. Keep them coming. The subscribes. Henry and I cannot thank you enough for everything. Thank you for being patient and waiting for us these last couple of months. And we will not have a video next week. Fair warning. Henry and I actually go on vacation next week for about 8 days. Henry and I will be road tripping all over the place, and Henry will actually be up to 32 presidential grave sites at the end of this road trip. That's correct. 32 presidential grave sites, and he's not even 10 years old yet. So, pretty cool stuff. We're going to be seeing a lot of things. Take a look. DeadHistory 1776 on Instagram. I'm sure I'm going to be posting a lot of pictures and different posts from our road trip. So definitely take a look at that and see what we're up to. But we will return in about 2 weeks with our very last Maryland signer of the Declaration of Independence. Yep, Charles Carroll. So stay tuned for that. Take a look at the bonus footage, guys. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Glad to be back. Bye-bye now. All right, some Thomas Stone bonus footage about to come up here. And I found a very special guest. Why, hello, Mr. Henry.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good.
Good, good. So what are the people about to see here in this Thomas Stone bonus footage?
His grave.
That's right. We just recently went and saw that, right? And we were there. We were hoping the gate wouldn't close on us because we got there like right after it was closing.
Yeah.
And we had to like rush to go to his gravesite and take some video and pictures, right?
Yeah.
And what did you see in the background from like where the cemetery is?
His house.
That's right? Beautiful big plantation house, right?
Yeah.
What'd you think of the property? Did you think it was like nice, the landscape?
Yeah.
Pretty sprawling and big?
Yeah.
Yeah, so. All right. Well, there you go. Bonus footage of Thomas Stone, signer from the state of?
Maryland.
There you go. Good job. Henry, thanks for joining us. Say bye to the people. I was telling them our road trip next week, right?
Yeah.
You excited?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So we'll see him in a couple weeks?
Mm-hmm.
See you guys in a couple weeks. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Hey, guys. How's it going? TJ here with Dead History. And let me flip you around. So, there's the house there. As you can see in the distance. Sprawling landscape of the plantation. There's Henry. Say hello. And the grave site and the cemetery of Thomas Stone, Declaration signer. Henry and I are going to go take a quick look. As you can see, family cemetery here, and there's Thomas himself, right here. Thomas Stone, signer of the Declaration of Independence, member of Congress, placed by the Maryland State Society, Daughters of the American Revolution. Stand there, Henry. Show everybody. Say hi, dude. It's been a while, right? And pretty cool. Look at the proximity to the house from where he's buried. There's the house, and there's Thomas Stone's grave. Pretty cool stuff. Pretty awesome. We're here after hours, and the main gate by the road, which is way, way up there, it says it locks at 4, so we kind of parked in the middle of the road, so the park ranger or whatever wouldn't keep us locked in. But there you go. Thomas Stone, gravesite here in Maryland, Declaration signer, and his home. Bye, guys.